You are no good. You are not a saint. You're just the child who could never be selfish, and so you learned to erase yourself to survive. They called it compassion, but Carl Jung called it prison. If this tears you up inside, sign up now, because no one here will spare you the truth. What you call love is just fear in disguise. What you call empathy is just the shadow of your own unfulfilled hunger. Your soul was not born to be crucified in the name of others. The self demands that you wake up, and that awakening will not be pretty. You weren't born an empath. You were shaped by the curve of fear. In your cradle, the house spoke louder than your cries, and you learned to be silent. You grew up reading faces like war maps. Hypervigilant, you anticipated storms to protect your own soul. They called it sensitivity, but it was a trench. A child who negotiates peace with their own presence disappears early. You realized that love came when you disappeared. So you disappeared. Your persona became a seal of silence. The shadow guarded the rest. You grew agile but restless, radar eyes, chest alert. Immature brains became sentinels. Carl Jung would call it early adaptation of the ego. It's hard to hear, but the self was grounded so adults would feel good. You decorated the emotional home of others and vacated your own. You heard that wanting was ugly, so you wanted for everyone but yourself. Attention became currency, care became a profession, presence became penance, and the more you healed, the more you broke inside. It wasn't a gift, it was a survival device. The calling was already there, to live without existing. The child learned to manage climates, not to feel the climate itself. This is where the story begins to hurt and to heal. Want proof? You apologize before speaking, like someone invading their own home. In the family group, you delete messages so as not to seem too much. At work, you take on tasks no one asked for because guilt dictates. In relationships, you become a therapist, a pastor, a retaining wall. At night, you lie down tired and nameless, your soul heavy, your voice muffled. This leaves a mark on your body, a tense jaw, light sleep, a knot in your stomach. It has a mark on your routine. You respond quickly to others, postpone your call. It has a mark on your money. You invest in other people's dramas, forget your own reserve. Have you noticed how the shadow provokes you when it tries to say no? It pushes delayed anger because the self was barred at the door. Surgical exercise for 7 days upon waking. Write what I feel in 3 lines. No poetry, no filter, no concern for anyone. Then call someone and make a simple, direct request without explanation. If you tremble, it's your body returning to childhood. Read Carl Jung's Man and His Symbols like a flashlight, and schedule a 30-minute appointment with yourself religiously. No screens, just breathing, a notebook, and your soul returning home. It may seem small, but it's a blow to the empath's old programming. And every blow to the old paves the way for something new. Perhaps you still call all this kindness. I call it golden exile, because the house applauds you when you fade and accuses you when you light up. The child who could never be has become an adult who never chooses to be. And when they choose, guilt throbs like a current. Culture applauds the selfless empath, but ignores the soul that bleeds behind. Beware, this applause feeds the shadow of the savior. It promises value in exchange for disappearance. It's the bargain of cheap love. I suffer, therefore I belong. But belonging without self is captivity. The call now is different. To exist without asking permission. Yes, they will call you selfish. Let them call. It's the echo of those who benefit from your silence. Healthy selfishness is the antidote that Carl Jung pointed out when the scales broke. The child couldn't be, but the adult can choose. And the choice begins by admitting that the gift was sewn into the wound. If the wound remains hidden, it becomes destiny. If it is seen, it becomes a portal. In the next step, we'll open the shiny package and expose the hidden cut. Because only by facing the fake shine will the shadow give back what it stole. They called what was once an open wound a gift. They said you were born with a rare sensitivity, but they never told you that this sensitivity was a shield forged in the heat of absence. An empath isn't just someone who feels more, they're someone who needed to feel for others to avoid being crushed. The tenderness that seems like a divine gift was born from the fear of losing love, from the urgency to avoid abandonment. Your soul learned to translate expressions, gestures, and silences like someone deciphering secret codes to survive. And that's how you became indispensable, the confidant, the peacemaker, the too good. But here's the hidden key. This too good was, in fact, the price for not being discarded. Carl Jung once said that the persona is born as a necessary mask, but when we forget it's a mask, it becomes a prison. The gift of empathy without roots in the self is just a golden handcuff. You smile, you help, you console, but inside the shadow murmurs, "And who cares for me?" Look at your routine and see if you recognize this disconnect. You offer advice even when it's not asked for and call it care. You accept invitations you don't want and call it generosity. You embrace pain that isn't yours and call it love. Deep down, it's fear of being rejected if you don't carry the weight of the world. The gift has become compulsion. The brilliance has become a mask. The wound has been adorned with virtue, but never healed. The self is buried under layers of other people's approval, and the shadow grows fat with accumulated resentment. A practical example: when you spend an entire day listening to other people's problems, but can't dedicate 15 minutes to asking yourself how you feel. This isn't altruism, it's self-abandonment with spiritual makeup. Read that again. Self-abandonment. Jung's call wasn't for you to be a martyr, but for you to be whole. True compassion begins when you don't have to sell your own peace in exchange for belonging. It's easy to confuse survival with virtue. Society applauds the exhausted empath, but doesn't know how to deal with the empath who dares to say no. The gift was applauded, the wound ignored, and you've grown accustomed to believing that you only deserve love if you carry crosses that aren't yours. But when the soul bleeds in silence, even kindness becomes a prison. Carl Jung warned, what we call light may be just shadow in disguise. You were taught to call love what was actually fear. Believe me, your capacity to feel is real, but its compulsive use is a scar, not a gift. The self demands return, asks for space to breathe without needing to justify its existence to the other. But the gift still binds like an invisible chain, and until we see the wound behind the medal, the cycle repeats. And when the cycle repeats, the paradox is born. The one who feels everyone, but cannot feel themselves. And that's when the next cut reveals itself. You become an expert at deciphering others, but you remain a stranger within your own skin. This is the paradox that tears the empath apart. You can feel the hidden anger in a stranger's gaze, but you can't name the anguish that runs through it. The shadow holds what you never dared acknowledge, the forbidden selfishness, the legitimate desire to exist without apology. The self watches from afar, waiting for the moment when you'll have the courage to return to yourself. It's an elegant absurdity. You read the world with surgical precision, but you lose your way when you need to read yourself. It's like living with a lighthouse that illuminates the entire ocean, except your own boat. Carl Jung said that nothing is more dangerous than the unobserved unconscious, and that's precisely where the risk lies. The more you dedicate yourself to deciphering the other, the further you distance yourself from your own soul. The empathic paradox isn't a virtue, it's a silent amputation. Here's how this plays out in practice. You know when a friend is lying, but you lie to yourself about being okay. You notice the fatigue on a colleague's face, but ignore the body that cries out for rest. You foresee storms in others' lives, but fail to see the flood within your emotional home. This is the hidden price of your ability. A life focused outward while everything inside deteriorates. The call of your psyche is brutal. Looking at yourself hurts more than carrying the weight of others, because when you look, you find the child you could never be. You find shelved desires, denied anger, dreams aborted in the name of peace. It's hard to recognize that the compass of your sensitivity has always pointed outward, leaving you without direction. And the more you ignore it, the more the shadow grows, waiting for the moment to claim it. The paradox is cruel because it feeds on applause. Society venerates the empath who bleeds for everyone, but disdains when they try to bleed for themselves. So you maintain the role of good, even when it means dying inside. And so the wound is eternalized. You carry others as proof of your worth, while your soul cries out for freedom. Carl Jung stated that what is not integrated returns as destiny. The empath's destiny is to repeat this imprisonment until they decide to look into the inner abyss. Because until they look, they remain a stranger within themselves. The paradox is this double life. A master in reading the world, illiterate in reading themselves, but every paradox hides a portal, and this portal opens when anger, limits, and the no emerge from the darkness of the shadow, crying out for recognition. And it is precisely this cry that begins to crack the mask of the disguised gift. Everything you repressed one day returns, but not as a whisper. It returns as a scream. The anger you buried to maintain harmony now throbs in your body. The limit you never dared impose appears as illness, as insomnia, as corrosive anxiety. The shadow is not a repository of evil, but the graveyard of the parts of you that were forbidden to exist. Within it are the no's you never said, the desires you swallowed hard, the dreams you traded for crumbs of approval. Carl Jung said that nothing is more dangerous than ignoring the shadow, because it takes revenge when denied. And you already feel this revenge. Sudden outbursts, resentment disguised as silence, a heavy heart when you help someone who doesn't deserve it. Yourself knows these impulses are not defects, but life's calling. Your soul cries out for rescue. Stop hiding what could set you free. Want to understand? Observe your moments of exhaustion. When someone asks for yet another favor and you accept, but inside you spit fire. When your mouth smiles, but your stomach tightens. When you say sure, but your mind screams, I can't take it anymore. This isn't ingratitude. It's the shadow demanding what was stolen from you, the right to exist fully, the right to say enough is enough, the right to be imperfect without losing love. Practical example, try denying something small this week, refusing an invitation, failing to respond to an immediate message, choosing rest instead of saving the world. Feel the guilt rise, but also notice the surge of strength that emerges. This is the shadow transforming into an ally, because what seems selfish is, in fact, healing. Carl Jung called this integration, allowing the darkness to reveal the part of light that was hidden. You don't need to fear the shadow, you need to listen to it. It holds the map to your liberation. What they call a flaw is just the piece of your soul that's tired of living in chains. No is as sacred as yes. Anger, when acknowledged, becomes energy for movement. Limits, when practiced, become safe territory for the self to flourish. The paradox is that the more you try to be only light, the more the darkness grows stronger behind. But when you look within, you discover that the darkness wasn't an enemy, it was a guardian. The empath needs to understand this. The shadow didn't come to destroy, it came to repay. And each time you allow yourself an act of self-preservation, the shadow smiles and makes room for something greater. This greater something is what leads us to the next cut. When compulsive surrender breaks and the soul can no longer bear the weight, inevitable exhaustion arises. There comes a point when the body screams what the mouth silences. The empath, who spent his life carrying the pain of others, wakes up with his own soul shattered. Burnout isn't just fatigue, it's a spiritual collapse. You try to smile, but your chest weighs like a wet stone. The mere request for help from someone feels like a death sentence because there's no longer any energy to sustain anyone. This is where the disguised gift reveals its deception. It wasn't a gift, it was a debt. You gave until you emptied yourself, believing it was love, but it was compulsion. Carl Jung would call this a rebellion of the psyche, the self-demanding retribution, breaking the cycle of self-abandonment. The shadow no longer accepts being ignored. Exhaustion is a warning. If you don't stop, you'll break completely. And the break isn't a failure, it's a beginning. It's the soul's brutal call telling you the farce is over. In practice, exhaustion shows up in detail. You can no longer feign enthusiasm in meetings. You can no longer bear to be the usual shoulder to cry on. You lose patience with small requests. Before, you swallowed. Now you choke. Your body freezes. Your mind refuses. Your heart protests. It's as if every cell screams, "Enough!" This enough is the echo of the self, tearing at the chains. Practical example, notice when your body gives you signals. Headache after long conversations, a lump in your throat when accepting favors, inexplicable fatigue even after rest. These are not isolated symptoms. They are notes from the soul begging for rescue. Jung reminded us, what we deny subjugates us, what we accept transforms us. Your denial has become a shackle. Your acceptance can become freedom. But to do so, you must face the void. You can no longer save the world while you yourself drown. Exhaustion, though cruel, is the gateway to something new. Because only when the empath can no longer support anyone does he realize he must learn to support himself. This is the paradox. The greatest strength arises when you admit your weakness. Soul burnout is not the end. It is the beginning of inner rebellion. The self demands space, and the shadow hands over the keys you left buried. Yes, it hurts. Yes, it dismantles. Yes, it will feel like you've lost everything, but losing the chains is not a loss, it is liberation. And each tear during this phase is water that clears the ground for something more solid to grow. This something is the call of sacred egoity, the reminder that saying I is not a sin, but salvation. After exhaustion comes the whisper that cuts like a blade. What if I existed for myself too? It's the call of sacred egoity, the moment when the soul refuses to be a bargaining chip. Here, what they called selfishness begins to reveal its true face. Not a defect, but a vaccine. Carl Jung warned that a healthy individual is one who loves themselves as much as they love others. But you've been trained to believe that loving yourself is betrayal. The result has been a life of unpayable emotional debts. The self demands rebalancing, and it's at this point that the rarest courage emerges, disappointing others so as not to disappoint yourself. It's hard because the empath fears losing love if they dare to choose. But it's precisely in this risk that liberation lies. The no you never said is the most sacred prayer your psyche awaits. In practice, embracing sacred egoity means facing the invisible tribunal of those who have always profited from your silence. When you begin to set boundaries, you'll hear accusations. You've changed. You're cold. You've become selfish. Make no mistake, this isn't proof you've made a mistake, but a sign that the programming that kept you imprisoned is being broken. A practical example. When refusing a favor that would drain your energy, notice how guilt arises. Don't fight it, just observe. The fault isn't yours. It's the voice of the old, obedient child still whispering. Read Carl Jung's Memories, Dreams and Reflections and understand how he himself walked through the fire of disappointing society to find his self. The whole world will try to label your courage as coldness, but in truth, it's the first sign of maturity. The shadow begins to return the power it held for years, and with that, you begin to walk through life with your spine erect. The call of sacred egoity is always violent because it breaks invisible pacts. Pacts with the family that trained you to serve, pacts with partners who loved you for your usefulness, pacts with friends who used you as a crutch. When you stand up for yourself, these pacts shatter. The pain is real, but it is childbirth. The self is not born in peace, it is born in conflict. The soul knows the time has come to own itself. You will lose people, you will hear accusations, you will feel fear. But you will gain something that no amount of applause can buy: integrity. It is at this moment that the journey ceases to be about saving the world and becomes about saving yourself. And when this choice is made, a new earthquake begins. Bonds are reconfigured, some fall, others flourish, and you discover what true relationship is. When you finally straighten your spine, the world around you trembles. The empath, who always hunched over, begins to straighten, and the bonds sustained by your silence crumble. It's the inevitable process of recalibration. Some relationships prove fragile, others grow stronger in the furnace of authenticity. Carl Jung called this movement differentiation, separating in order to exist. And it's in this cut that the shadow begins to show who is truly on your side and who was merely on your side of usefulness. People are upset because they've lost unlimited access to your heart. They'll call you selfish, cold, distant. But the truth is, for the first time, you're practicing true love for yourself. The self demands encounters between wholes, not bargains of fragments. Your soul begins to perceive the brutal difference between those who truly love you and those who merely fed off your lack of boundaries. See how this happens in practice. The friend who only seeks you out when they need you disappears when you start saying no. The relative who used your patience as an emotional trash begins to accuse you of changing. The partner who demanded you carry the burden of the relationship complains when you ask for reciprocity. This isn't a loss, it's a purification. The call of sacred egoity cleanses your life of parasitic bonds and makes room for authentic relationships. Practical example: try observing who stays close when you set a limit. These are the real ones. Those who distance themselves weren't with you, they were with the function you represented. Carl Jung said that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there's a reaction, both are transformed. But a real reaction only exists when two whole beings meet. This recalibration is painful, but liberating. Your soul may even feel empty at first, as if silence were a loss. But make no mistake, this silence is the fertile space where new relationships will flourish. The self no longer allows you to accept crumbs. It demands a feast of reciprocity. The shadow, which once hid your anger, now guards its strength, and with it you become selective. True relationships are not born of need, but of choice. And as you reconfigure your bonds, you realize that intensity is not intimacy, and that drama is not depth. The recalibration doesn't end with people walking away. It expands to the discernment that arises within you. And this discernment paves the way for the next cut, learning to separate compulsive love from differentiated love, and finally recognizing where the other ends and you begin. Here begins the cruelest part of the journey, realizing that you've confused intensity with intimacy your entire life. The empath has grown accustomed to calling love what was disguised need, and depth what was merely drama. This is where psychological discernment emerges, the scalpel that cuts through illusions. Carl Jung said that seeing things as they are, and not as we wish them to be, is an act of courage. The self demands this cold gaze, capable of distinguishing between true closeness and a toxic bond. The shadow ceases to be an enemy and becomes a magnifying glass. It reveals who truly loved you and who merely used you as an escape valve. It's painful to recognize that many of the most intense relationships you've experienced were, in fact, contracts for emotional survival. But it's in this cut that your soul begins to breathe again. Practical example. Think about the people you call close. How many of them truly know who you are, and how many only know who you were trained to be? Psychological discernment forces you to do this calculation, and the answer almost always hurts. You discover that you often gave yourself not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of loss, fear of disappointment, fear of being alone. And fear doesn't create intimacy, it creates imprisonment. The call now is to see beyond the emotional theater. To love isn't to dissolve. To help isn't to erase yourself. True closeness doesn't drain, it nourishes. Carl Jung reminded us that when we project onto others what we lack in ourselves, we create bonds of dependence, not freedom. Discernment is the courage to look at someone and say, I see you as you are, and I refuse to transform you into a mirror of my lack. This discernment is not born of hatred, but of lucidity. The mature soul no longer confuses intensity with love, need with affection, necessity with care. The self learns to separate what is real from what is projection, and this separation doesn't kill love. It purifies. Relationships become a choice, not a compulsion. You discover that you can be present without being drained. You can care without disappearing. You can love without destroying yourself. But this clarity comes with an initial loneliness because old connections can't bear so much truth. It's a temporary, necessary, fertile void. The shadow reminds you that this void isn't a hole, it's a breeding ground. And it's in it that the next phase germinates. The freedom to choose when and how to use your sensitivity without being a slave to it. Here the game changes. The empath stops being hostage to their own sensitivity and begins to use it as a tool. It's the transition from compulsion to consciousness. You no longer give because you need to be loved. You give because you choose to. The self regains its lost throne, and the soul finally breathes. Carl Jung said that true freedom is not doing everything, but choosing what to do. And this choice, for someone who has always lived for others, is revolutionary. You realize that you are not obligated to answer every call. You are not obligated to carry every cross. Your empathy becomes selective, strategic, sacred. And the more you choose, the more you realize that the energy that was previously diluted in everyone else is now concentrated in you. The call of this phase is clear: to stop being a survival tool for others and become the architect of your own life. In practice, this means something simple and brutal. You can say no. And when you do, you realize the world doesn't fall apart. The person adapts, the relationship adjusts, and you continue to exist. This is freedom. Practical example. Choose an area of your life, family, work, or friendship, and set a clear limit. Tell yourself, no more here. Observe how your shadow reacts, instilling guilt, fear, even anger. But also observe the strength that emerges when the limit is respected. It is at this point that you discover that the true gift was not to feel everything, but to decide what to feel. Carl Jung reminded us that individuation is always a process of choice, between repeating the old or risking the new. And the new requires the courage to disappoint. This courage is the passport to your emotional sovereignty. The freedom of choice is what transforms empathy into power. No longer power over others, but power over yourself. You discover you can care without dissolving, listen without burdening, love without dying. The soul finds rest because it finally no longer needs to justify itself. The self flourishes because it is no longer hostage to external approval. The shadow, once feared, now serves as a guardian, reminding you that no limit is a sin. This freedom may frighten those who benefited from your submission, but it also attracts people who recognize and respect your wholeness. This is where the journey reaches its peak. Sensitivity ceases to be a weakness and becomes a conscious superpower. And it is in this achievement that the final door opens, the encounter with the integrated empath, the one who no longer needs to choose between caring for themselves or caring for others, because they have learned to unite the two. The point has come where the wound becomes a scar, and the scar becomes strength. The integrated empath is no longer a prisoner of childhood hypervigilance, but an adult who recognizes their sensitivity as a choice. The soul no longer dissolves in the drama of others. It now remains whole, even when welcoming. The self has found its place, balancing external care with internal love. Carl Jung described this as individuation, the meeting of opposites into a solid center. You no longer need to rush to put out fires that aren't yours. You don't need to carry guilt that wasn't born within your chest. The shadow, once feared, is now an ally. It guards your boundaries, protects your energy, sustains your courage. The integrated empath doesn't sacrifice themselves. They offer themselves, not because they have to, but because they choose to. In practice, the integrated empath seems almost strange to the world. They listen without emptying themselves. They help without nullifying themselves. They love without dissolving. Practical example: when a friend breaks down, you welcome them, but then close the door and go about your own business without guilt. When a family member asks for more than you can give, you respond firmly, "I love you, but I can't right now." This phrase, which once seemed impossible, now flows naturally, because you've understood that it's not about coldness, but about justice with your own soul. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a life is to become who you are. And you, by becoming whole, give back to the world something more valuable than any sacrifice: authentic presence. The presence of someone who no longer acts as a martyr, but as a complete human being. The integrated empath is a beacon, not because they illuminate others until they are consumed, but because they have learned to shine without extinguishing themselves. The self pulses steadily, the shadow walks alongside, the soul expands in silence. You no longer seek approval, because internal approval is enough. The relationships that endure are those that flourish in reciprocity. The care they offer comes from overflowing, not from need. And compassion, finally, is not compulsion, it is freedom. This is the peak of the journey, but not the end. Because life's call never ceases. There will always be new mirrors, new tests, new abysses. And it is precisely this dance between light and darkness that keeps you alive. The integrated empath is not the end of one story, but the beginning of another. The story of someone who, after losing themselves in others, found within themselves the home they always sought. And now tell me, how long will you call fear love? How long will you crucify your soul in the name of others? How long will you run away from yourself just so you don't hear the call of your own shadow? You know the answer is already burning inside you. So face it, write it, expose it. If this tore you up inside, sign up now, because that was just the first cut.